everyone, welcome back. I'm Melissa Pineda, and today I will be discussing the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. So this book was published in 2004, and before I get into my review, if there's anything today that you hear that you find interesting or that you like, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. So why listen to my review of this book? Because this book is definitely one of a kind. I haven't read anything quite like it before, and it is fascinating. It basically talks about snap judgments, it talks about unconscious reactions, and it has all these different studies and test cases that are just really intriguing, and it makes you think about your own actions and facial expressions and judgments. So let me get right into my review, but I do think you'll find this one really interesting. So the author talks about something called thin slicing. So thin slicing is the ability of the unconscious mind to make quick judgments or decisions based on very limited information. So basically a thin slice of experience. And that is what he explains is thin slicing. So it's how snap judgments can be surprisingly accurate, but can also be biased or misleading. He talks about how you can have educated unconscious reactions, and he gives like lots of studies and different examples. So there could be a doctor, for instance, and this doctor is interpreting the results of a patient's tests or looking at the patient's file, and seeing, okay, based on all of this, it says the patient has, disease X. But the doctor has like a gut reaction, a gut feeling. And that gut feeling is telling the doctor something opposite than what he sees on paper or in person. And so that would be an example of an educated unconscious reaction. Like just by looking at the patient, the feeling that the doctor gets, the doctor can't necessarily explain why they think the information is wrong. It's just a gut reaction, a response, an unconscious reaction, but based on his or her education, based on their experience. And he gives other cool examples too, like a firefighter and in a fire and stuff. So it's just very, very interesting. The author also talks about how new and different is always more vulnerable to market research. And he gives this really good example on Pepsi and Coca-Cola and basically blind taste tests. And anything new, like if you're gonna market something, like the new Coca-Cola, in the past, people have really responded negatively to rebranding of something that has been consistent, of something that has been something that they've really enjoyed. So the new version of Coca-Cola hasn't gone over as well as the classic version of Coca-Cola. But he gives different examples and how just different isn't always good or accepted at first. And this is like across the board, whether it's with food, drinks, singers, music. The author also talks about how you can have a snap judgment from years of training and experience. Again, going back to doctors or firefighters, anyone that has had years of training and experience, and they can make these snap judgments, which you can't teach. Like there's no course you can take on how to make a snap judgment based on like a gut response based on all your education and training. So again, goes over all sorts of really interesting examples and studies. The author also talks about split-second facial expressions, and this is really interesting. So just different video clips he talks about from trials or from interviews with couples and watching how couples interact and predicting divorce, essentially. And he talks about how there have been studies performed where you can read into people's split-second facial expressions that someone might not even, most people wouldn't notice. It's just people trained to look for these things would notice. And he did say that like one split-second facial expression that is something that tells you that someone's going to get divorced or is more likely to get divorced is a split-second reaction or expression of contempt. So contempt is like the worst when it comes to a relationship. And so you can actually, there have been studies performed where scientists can see this in people's expressions, and they'll pause the tape and rewind it and check it out again. And yeah, it's really interesting because as Gladwell talks about too, we don't even realize what expressions we're making sometimes. And we've all been in the situation and position of someone saying like, oh, why'd you just give me that look? Or you don't even realize that you are having a facial reaction to something, and where you cannot, it's involuntary, you can't control your face in a certain situation or even for a split second. So it's very interesting, and it really makes you wonder, how people interpret your facial expressions. Because they're not always going to tell you, right? You could just give off a certain impression. You don't even realize you're doing it. The author also talks about just the weird power of first impressions to begin with. He gives a very interesting case study on people that are in an orchestra, so violinists and different musicians, and how there was a study performed where certain people were sort of dismissed based on how they appear, based on their look. So for instance, a very small, petite musician might just be dismissed as like, oh, well, they don't have a powerful enough, lung capacity or voice, and they're not going to be very good at doing this. But when they put like the curtain, and you just listen, right? You're just listening to the music. You're not judging based on what you see, your first impression from sight, based on sight. You get a completely different response and reaction. And it's very interesting. So he's saying that if you can control first impressions, you can remove bias. And you can't always control first impressions, but he gave some more examples of how there was I think an art critic or something, and they told someone they worked with to hide the art pieces, so they'll open up a door and boom, the art piece will be there. So they actually make it so they're getting almost like the best or the most out of their first impression. So it's just like whatever they initially respond to is a true and genuine reaction to what they're seeing, as opposed to, they walk in a room and they're a little distracted, or the light's too bright and they're looking at something, and almost their first impression is affected in some way. So he gives a lot of examples about this, and just about different first impressions, and about bias, and it's not always like bias is wrong or bad, or certainly not intentional. But he talks about being able to remove it, or at least attempt to control it in certain ways. It's an extremely interesting read. I'm going to leave it there, but if you want to read more and find out more about just the studies that he analyzed and used and the different examples, it's worth it. I highly recommend this book. But as I mentioned before, the link is in the description. So if you're interested, go pick yourself up a copy. And if there's anything that you found interesting or liked, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for listening. Until next time.